All right, everybody. We're back again so quickly. But we got my boy Andrew that's about to call in and talk some more with us. So let me have him call in now. All right. All right, here we go. Hello.
Hey, what's good?
What's up, man?
Dude, nothing. Stoked about this podcast, stoked that you're doing this, stoked that you're bringing some light to like the other side of the industry, but also highlighting these musicians and what they do and how we get to work alongside them. You know, it's for sure a cool endeavor.
Definitely. Thank you, man. Thank you. So yeah, before we begin, go ahead, introduce yourself. Let everybody know what you do. Obviously, we're not going to have that many viewers right now, but this is going to be available for, on podcasts and later dates. So let everybody know who you are, what you do, etc., where to find you.
Yeah, my name's Andrew Dewar, freelance audio engineer. I do a lot of work in the studio. I do a lot of work in live sound. I do a lot of work in corporate audio, and I run a business called Dewar Productions. Through all that, you can find me most likely just search for Andrew Dewar, or Dewar is Dewar, or Andrew N. Dewar, and you'll find me right quick. And through all that, yeah, I do a lot of different versions of sound, but one of the cool things that I've learned through doing not just studio and live and corporate audio is that one of the things I've learned is that it's all cross training, right? It's not about what compressor you use, but it's about how you use it. And so quickly I've started to learn that, like, one of the things I love about doing corporate audio, people are like, oh, that's just talking heads, or like, that's just a lav mic on some person talking about pharmaceutical drugs for 45 minutes. You're like, yeah, but how often do you get to isolate a voice for 45 minutes on a record and learn how to EQ that just right, like just how to hit that right? So anyways, long story short, that's what I do. I work in all sorts of kind of aspects of the industry doing sound.
Nice. So yeah, I know, like you said, you do a lot of corporate AV, a lot of live stuff. This is awesome because, a lot of people think, oh, this is the boring sector. This is not what I want to do. If you can tell people what is not, because a lot of people, again, are going to think, I get a lot of students that come in and, they want to make beats. They want to be artists. They think being an engineer is boring. Now, people come in and think, oh, well, doing corporate AV, that's even more boring. Like, tell people like a little more, like, what makes it fun besides obviously pay. I know a lot of corporate AV jobs pay pretty well. And often more times they pay more than what a studio engineer is going to get. But if you can just elaborate a little bit about your experience doing like corporate AV, live sound, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, and those are two separate sides of the, like live sound and corporate AV.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different gig. Like live sound is when I get to work at the Riv or work at the Aragon.
Sure.
Or when I get to work with Chance the Rapper, or when I get to, work with Anderson .Paak. Like those are exciting and are obviously along the music kind of side of the industry that a lot of cats are really aspiring to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm working in corporate AV, I'm getting to work. Usually one of the best things is working under better conditions, where when I'm setting up a sound system and I'm working on tuning a sound system or time aligning or getting something to sound just right, time, it seems to be so much more valuable, or less valuable and like more ample. And so oftentimes I get to find myself doing a better job in those situations, or at least having more time to perfect my craft.
Yeah.
So that's one of the cool things I love about that. As you said, like pay is great. Doing travel gigs and flying to other cities is great, but it's all cross training, man. It's about learning how to use a compressor. It's not about learning how to compress hip hop vocals, but rather how does this tool work? When do I need a hammer and when do I need a sledgehammer? Right.
Right. And I know, I mean, I've had limited experience. I did some corporate AV and stuff when I first started. A lot of times it's harder to do that because you never know if you're dealing with just one speaker, like when he's going to be calm and when he's just going to ramp up and get loud. So what do you feel is like the hardest part about doing that? Is it like not knowing what the speaker is going to do, or what, if you can elaborate, like what's the hardest part about doing that?
One of the things you just said was spot on, bro. It's one mic oftentimes.
Right.
If I mess up the 808 on a track, that's one element. But if I mess up the one mic on stage and it gets RF dropouts or it's EQ'd terribly and no one can understand what that CEO is saying, I just ruined the whole show. I didn't just ruin the subs or like the one part of the track, but I ruined everything. And so sometimes I feel like the stakes are a lot higher and you're like just turning up one fader, just turning up one knob.
Mm-hmm.
But it's everything in that show at that point. Right. So that's some of the times where like I feel the pressure in one pointer finger and one pinky finger pushing a fader.
Right. No, definitely, man. I know I've done, live sound at church with, preachers and then music. And it's, for me, it's stressful. You're, especially not knowing, in the times I've done it, it's not knowing, what praise and worship is doing. So I'm, like you said, just riding a fader, like, okay, go up, go down, go up, go down. He's blaring out. Let me go down. He's going low. Let me go back up. So a lot of people think it's very easy work, but it's really not. It's very intensive. It can be at times.
Yeah, and even what you said, like this reminds me of when I was working as an intern with an audio company in the Chicago area. They were talking about how they were saying, I don't understand how you do studio work. I don't want to sit and listen to the same snare drum hit for 20 minutes and perfecting it. But then I flip it on its head and I'm like, I love perfecting that snare drum hit or that track and getting it just how I want it to sit. But then when you flip it on its head, there's nothing like the live sound side of it and the rush where it's never going to be perfect, but it's in the moment. It's like, it's two different sides of creating art. And so although some people think it's boring to sit in the studio and some people think it's terrifying to do live sound, it's like, it's two different energies that really kind of fuel the industry and the art.
No, it definitely is, especially with live sound, because there's no do-overs. In the studio, there's do-overs.
No, it's done. It's done when you're in live.
Yeah, with live, it's you roll with it. Oh damn, I wasn't on top. I didn't, pull this fader down quick enough that, in the studio you can say, okay, stop, you clipped, let's go back, let's redo it again. But yeah, live sound, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You got to be on top of it. And a lot of times, I know from my experience, again, I don't have as much experience as you doing that, but I know from my experience doing live sound, that was a big thing, was, riding faders, not knowing what's coming next and just having to react, in a split second.
Yeah, man, for sure.
Yeah. So what, so obviously, nowadays, we have COVID to deal with. So obviously live sound and live stuff has kind of, I would imagine, has taken a step back in terms of, the amount of work that's being done. So what have you found, or what have you done, to find yourself keeping yourself busy and keeping the bills paid?
Yeah. At the beginning, first of all, there was no work to be had in any industry. It felt like when COVID first hit, like studios didn't exist, live sound didn't exist, corporate audio didn't exist, nothing. Right. And dude, one of the coolest things I watched happen was everybody who made anything related to audio, whether you made plugins or hardware or speakers or microphones, is like they started to just put out all these insanely powerful and useful videos on YouTube and Facebook Live. All these webinars that I was blown away. It was literally like $1,000 of free training just at our disposal as engineers. So
yeah,
that's how I spent the first few days and the first few weeks, really was like digging into that and just saying, how do I hone my craft so that when this comes back, I'm an asset? Right. I don't want to come back and be rusty. I want to come back and be better.
Sure.
So that was one of the things I really spent a lot of time on. But then as people started to figure it out, I'm really lucky that I started to get a lot of calls for studio work as people were like, hey, I've got a record to put out. Started working on at the beginning of this year. Just started working on a jam band record that I probably honestly would not have gotten to work on if it wasn't for COVID, because I would have probably been doing travel gigs or would have been out of town or couldn't have given a whole week to tracking this record.
Mm-hmm.
So got to work on a record for a band called Fuzz Love here in Chicago that I worked on their first record. So that was a pretty exciting experience. I'm finished mixing that up, and that's going to be a bit of a journey.
Nice.
But as kind of you and I mentioned, like, I've seen a little bit of a resurgence in my studio work just as I'm here in the city in Chicago. It's like I'm here and I can actually record people and actually work with artists. So It's been kind of thrilling that way. And obviously, one of the big things with COVID in all aspects of the industry was like, how do I help people who, I mean, I'm working with a lot of musicians, and you know how musicians make money today is they do shows, and they can't do shows. So it's like, how do I roll back my rates to appropriately, hopefully help people to still create their art and share their music?
Sure.
That's been a lot of the battle. But at the same time, when you do that, you keep that door open. You don't close the door. Like, if you're like, this is my rate and I'm not changing it, you close the door. But if you're like, listen, this is my rate, but let's make art because you've got stuff to share.
Sure.
Man, you open doors rather than close them. So it's been a cool experience to watch happen.
Nice. So what are some things you have done to keep those doors open? Besides, you know, obviously adjusting prices and stuff like that. Like, is there anything different that you're doing, if you can share, like something you didn't do before COVID that now you're saying, hey, this works, this is viable, this is something that I can take forward, if you can share?
I'll share something that's tangentially related to that. And this is a really cool project that back in 2016, 2017, I started this project called the Chicago Collab Sessions at the time with my buddy Nick Jarris.
Yep.
And what we were doing, we were literally renting recordings. This is actually how I first met you.
Yep.
Joe, you started the Musicians Coalition. And I was like, this is it. This is the thing. And then everything sucks, and then life gets weird. But I was like so excited about these projects. We were renting out recording studios. We'd say, let's say somebody had a guitar lick, and they'd record that guitar lick with us ahead of time, 3 weeks ahead of time. We'd put it online, and we'd say, hey, if you are a musician and you want to come record over this, we rented out Miller Street Studios for the day. Come out, record, just like collaborate and write music together. It's to anybody. You could be the worst musician or the best musician. You're invited. Started doing that in 2016, 2017, and we stopped doing it because, my buddy Nick moved out to Colorado. And as soon as COVID hit, he hit me up and he says, hey, man, I think we should start those collab sessions again. And I was like, dude, there has never been a worse time. This is this is awful. We can't get people, like, we were getting 60, 70 people together in the studio and write music. Like, that doesn't work in COVID.
Right.
But then I started thinking about it. I was like, dude, there's never been a better time. And so we found a way to create small private sessions where it's 8, musicians, 6 musicians together in a studio, rewriting tunes and collaborating. And what this has done is literally been creative outreach, where it's like, I'm now meeting musicians. We did one in Denver. We're doing one in Austin in 3 weeks, Austin, Texas. We did one in Chicago, done 2 in Chicago now since COVID has hit. And what I've started to realize is, like, this is marketing for my brand and for my work.
Yeah.
And yes, I am not getting paid. I guarantee you I am losing money on these. I'm paying for them. But at the same time, like, I'm not getting rusty. Like I was talking about earlier, like, one day when this magically all turns back around, the last thing you want to be is rusty, because all of your colleagues and all the other people in this industry, they're getting sharper, man. They're sharpening that blade. Definitely. So that's what I've been trying to do, is just stay sharp, even if it means I'm working for free, or if I'm working for very little money, it means I'm working still, because that's what's important to me, is doing what I love.
Right. And that's the thing, like you said, you say working for free, but that's the thing. Essentially, yes, you are working without getting paid, but you're planting seeds, right?
Yeah, man.
And that's the big thing that I tell a lot of my students is, man, you can't be afraid to work for free, given the right opportunity. Now, we've all done it. I've worked for free for over a year when I was interning and doing stuff like that. But everything I did, even after I was done interning, I worked for free with, okay, this artist is getting a lot of attention on this blog. Let me record a song, mix a song for him for free, because I know it's going to be posted on this blog, which is going to bring attention to me. And that's one of the big things. I don't know if you can, concur with me, but that's one of the big things I'm a firm believer in is free work is not necessarily bad work. You can work for free, but building something, building that attention, that attraction, once things kind of even out, it's going to come back to you. Is that something that you found true with doing some of those, free sessions or whatnot?
Completely. I literally did this a few months ago before COVID. It's over a year ago, I guess now. Was I just started to track like where all my work came from, and almost everything I did came from this month I did called Free Sound February, when I was like still an intern and still in college, and I had no money and I was poor, and I just said, hey, listen, if I've never done any work with you before, contact me, and you will cover the, if you can cover the studio costs, or like if it's a live sound gig, as long as you just cover my gas or whatever, like right. I don't want to lose money, but as long as I make no money, I'm down.
Sure.
I tracked so much of my work, 80%, 90% of my work, I tracked right back to that 1 month I did all months for any new clients for free. And I started to realize, like, man, it does two things when you work for free. It refines your skills, yes. But it also, like you said, it plants those seeds. And it's like, yeah, you might not have money today, but 6 months from now, your band might realize they want to do a record, or that artist might realize they want to do a mixtape. And like, you're going to be the person who said, yeah, I believe in your art, or like, I understand what you're trying to create because we've worked together.
Yeah.
Dude, it's not even like, it's not you plant one seed and you get 5 crops out of it. So
exactly. No,
dude,
you plant that seed, they're going to come back to you, because it's like, hey, we loved working with him. He was great, whatnot. Again, I always preach it because that's what I did a lot of. And a lot of people coming up are scared to do that because they think, and not just pointing out certain schools or whatnot, but I get a lot of people like, that went to certain schools and whatnot that think, hey, I'm entitled to a job and this, that, the other. And it's like, no, you gotta work. I mean, we all know this business is all about, creating relationships, creating clients, stuff like that. Like, you can't just come to me with a degree from Full Sail or the school I went to, Crass or Columbia or something like that, and say, right. Hey, I need 40 hours a week worth of sessions. Like, no.
No one gets that.
Right.
Nobody gets that. Even the top dogs, they get that, but right below them, no way.
No, and that's the thing, that the problem that these schools teach these job assistants. The big thing I tell my students is there is no job assistants. Go out and find clients. Like, I learned that my school didn't teach me. They said, yeah, we'll set you up with a job, we'll set you up with an internship, this, that. They set me up with an internship, and I'm heavy. I've always said this in every podcast I've done. The biggest thing I learned in my internship didn't have anything to do with recording, mixing, mastering, anything engineering. The biggest thing I learned was how to run business. And knowing that, hey, I'm not going to make it working for a studio that has 10 engineers on staff. How I'm going to make it is by finding guys that want to work with me, building relationships and saying, hey, I could take them to any studio, right? I could take this guy, he loves working with me. I could take him to any studio. We could book time at that studio and I'm getting paid no matter what. So,
right.
Yeah.
Dude, even you're spot on, because I've said this a lot about like doing freelance work in the world of live sound and corporate AV, is that you're not tied to a sinking ship.
Sure.
And what's great through COVID, the reason I've stayed afloat and I've continued to work a lot is because I'm not full-time employed with anybody.
Right.
And even for you as an engineer, like you were saying, I'm not tied to a studio. If their budget says I can only afford $25 an hour for studio time, it's like, well, if it's 45 at your studio, you can't work with them.
Right.
But if all of a sudden that opens the doors, you're like, well, I can find somewhere in the city that's going to be 25 an hour, right, and then I can still make some money. And so all of a sudden it's like, it opens doors rather than closing them, as long as, like you said, you have the business skills to draw those clients. And,
right.
But for you, I mean, and I'll just say this because I think there's a lot of cats out there who don't realize this, like, what you're doing, running a studio that's successful is pretty near impossible in like 2021 and 2020.
Sure.
And even pre-COVID, dude, like I was talking with a buddy, Jay High, and he's a producer now, lives out in LA, and he's an engineer, really talented engineer. And we were talking about, he threw a statistic, I can't remember, but I'll say it as a low statistic, 70% recording studios are pretty much losing money every month.
Yep.
And like, dude, for you to have a family and to run a studio and to have a home is like, it's a little bit of a small miracle, bro. I hope you understand that like people who know you and meet you, I hope they understand that like what you're doing is a grind, but like it is a small miracle. And what you're doing is like, to run a podcast like this now is cool, man. And it's a sign that like the hustle and the business skills are as worth as much as your ability to push buttons or turn knobs or faders or whatever you do, you know?
Yeah.
So props to you for doing that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And you know, if I can share, you know, any 2 cents of knowledge, ever since COVID, this will be hard to believe. This is the most money I've ever made in my life since COVID hit. And again, I'm not trying to float my boat or do anything like that. You know, I'm confident, but I'm the most humble person most people will meet. But I've been prepping myself for this scenario, and the secret to doing it is knowing that I'm not limited to just locally here in Chicago. Yes, if somebody wants to record with me, they're going to come to me here in Chicago.
Definitely.
But ever since I've been in this business, I've been big on promoting myself countrywide, worldwide, etc. So as soon as COVID hit, I had tons of people hit me up from all over the country that had stuff recorded, you know, and unemployment was paying a lot. People were getting stimulus checks. Now all of a sudden they're saying, okay, let me, you know, Joe, hey, I need this album mixed. You know, I'm getting 10, 20 songs a week to mix. And I was more than staying afloat. I was making tons, you know, and I still am. Like, I'm still, it feels like if anybody's been in the restaurant business, there's the term in the weeds, you know, where if anybody's worked in, you know, restaurant waiting tables, you know what it means in the weeds. Like, you got too many tables, you got too much stuff to attend to. That's how I am right now, like with mixes and stuff like that. Like, I'm in the weeds. Like, I can't get to everything right away. And it's a blessing, you know, to be able to be this busy in this time. But, you know, that's, you know, if I can give a gem to people is knowing, hey, you don't have to limit yourself. If you live in, you know, Gary, Indiana, your market isn't just Gary, Indiana.
Right.
Sure, if people want to record with you, they're going to have to come to Gary, Indiana, unless they take you to some other studio. But you can mix. You got people sending sessions from all over the country. So that's one thing that I'm, you know, proud of myself, that I've always, ever since I started doing this, I've been a big fan of reaching out to other people. So as soon as COVID hit, I had people from all over the country sending me stuff to mix.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's definitely been great.
Do you think a lot of that, like one of the things I think a lot about is like, if I mix a track, I'm like, man, how do I make sure people know I mix that track? How do you do a good job of like making sure as you mix tracks and you're just like, this is something I'm proud of? How do you make sure people hear that and then affiliate that level of production with your name and with your skills?
You mean as far as like letting people know that I did it?
Yeah, or just like the best, that, or like the things that you're working on that you're proud of, like, you know what I mean? Like, I just think about like client acquisition and how I'm thinking about how, like, if I mix a record, I always try to get my name on that record, whether it's on the back or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
What are you doing so that you make sure that, like, when you do great work, it spawns, like you said, it plants more seeds for future great work?
So, yeah, and that's the tough part today, because back in the day, in the 90s, you had liner notes.
Right? Yeah, right.
You know, we all grew up. I mean, if I'm sure, how old are you? You're
27. Yeah,
27.
So, like,
okay,
I was alive in the 90s, but
I'm 36. So one of my biggest things when I was growing up, when CDs were big, was I would look at liner notes. Like, I would look at who recorded this, who produced this, who mixed this. So you could actually see who did this. Today with digital, liner notes are scarce, so it's hard to know who mixed this record, who produced this record, stuff like that. So for me, what I always try and do, and there's been plenty of times, and I just had this conversation before, where I've mixed big records and my name wasn't attached to that,
Right.
Which to me is very upsetting, because that's what we live off of, right? When I get a call, most clients, as much as clients say, well, what have you done? Who have you worked with? If I say, well, I worked with so-and-so, but you can't find my name attached to that record, it's like, is he telling the truth or is he lying? So yeah, that's the very tough part nowadays.
Even that term that you just used, I this one I see all the time with like Grammy winning records. Like people are like, oh, I won a Grammy. It's like, no, you worked on a Grammy award winning record.
Yes.
Which is like, could just mean you just like tuned up the drum kit before the drummer sat down, or that could just mean you set up mics and you were the assistant engineer.
Exactly.
But
because
I've hard. Yeah.
I've had that. I've worked on Grammy award winning records, but if you win, like if let's say an artist wins for album of the year, in order for the engineer to get a Grammy, you have to do 51% of the work. So
right. 100%. Right.
How many engineers are doing 51% of the work on a complete album? You know?
Right. Never anymore, man. Right.
So it's tough. So yeah, you can say, like, I can say, yes, I've worked on Grammy award winning projects, but do I have a Grammy? No. But that's where it comes into showing the credentials. And nowadays it's so tough to get those liner notes, and it shouldn't be that tough. You know, that's something. I'm a part of the Recording Academy. I'm a voting member.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
And that's something I stress every single year, is we have to find a way that if you're on, you know, Apple Music, Spotify, whatnot, you should be able to look up and find out who recorded this, who mixed it, who mastered it. So it's not that hard. We just need to make it happen. And I'm a firm advocate of that, because it's tough. I mean, just in the past year, I'm not going to name names, but I've worked on songs that reached Billboard #1 in, you know, gospel categories, and are nominated for Grammys and stuff like that. But guess whose name wasn't listed on the credits?
Right.
Mine. You know?
Even like, yeah, because like what you said, like if you go to Spotify, I see this all the time, you can click on credits, and it'll show you all the writers, and it'll show you the producers, and it's like, man, where is that engineer slot? Or where is that mastering engineer?
Exactly.
And it's like, and not even for anything more than just that, like credits and that referral and that word of mouth that we need. Or even for me, like I'm so passionate about looking to Grammy category 69, best engineered record non-classical, right? Dude, every year I look up the winners and then I listen to those records. And I used to host like a Facebook group where we'd all like listen every week and just try to, you know, learn, because that's how we get better, is when we know who mixes the records we love. But also that's how the artists know, like, it's the reason they go to you for a record instead of me. And it's not like I'm hurt. It's like you offer different skills, and if you want that sound, this is who you go to. So that's one of the issues, obviously, inherently facing the digital world that we're in.
Right. And that's what the Grammys were founded on, was the people behind the scenes. Nowadays, the Grammys has become more of a who sold more records. And it shouldn't be about that. It should be who made the best record, like who wrote the best song, who engineered, you know, a pretty captivating song, you know, stuff like that. Like, for engineers, that's our well-being, you know, being able to say, and again, I'm not a big fan of clout chasing and saying I work with this guy, but those are that's our resume, right? You know, our resume isn't where we went to school, and if we finish with a 4.0 GPA, our resume is who have you worked with, what songs have you worked on, let me hear what you've done. You know, and it's like, well, I worked on this song, and it's like, well, prove it. Well, I can't prove it because they didn't list the credits.
Right, like you can't send them the mixes and be like, oh, here's the Pro Tools files. Like, it's just like, that's not the world we live in. So it is frustrating, right? And it's like, we want to make sure we're getting those credits,
Right.
just for the small fact of like we want to be able to use that for a way to acquire new work and prove like just the quality of work we're producing.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah, man, that's a battle.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one, and it's one that, you know, I'll fight till the day I die, because that's, you know, it's important for everybody involved to get the credit that's due. You know, whether,
Right.
you know, most of the time people say, well, engineers are getting paid regardless, but yet we still deserve our credit because we do a lot more than just push buttons. You know, like we talked about before, I do a lot more than just hit record. You know, people come to me for creativity. People come to me for production. People come to me because they know, hey, Joe, I know you have a good ear. You can produce this record, whatnot. So yeah, those credits are definitely important.
Yeah, and like you said, it's the engineer is part of the creative process all the way. Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, man. If you're talking about someone who's going to touch every inch of that track, you would hope you're proud of the person you chose to do that.
Right.
Because there's nobody who knows the music right after the artist. It's the engineer who's soloed up those tracks and figured out what that squeak was, or figured out why there's a click in the middle of it. Like,
right.
Man, that's the person that's
figured out. You come to them and you say, hey, this is the sound I'm going for. They know, okay, I'm going to use this mic. I'm going to use this preamp. You know, this is
completely, dude.
You know, I mean, that's what we do. You know, it's not like back in the 70s, 80s where an engineer was invincible. You know, they, you know, Michael Jackson. It was all the talent and all the production was done in the recording process with Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones. You know, the engineer was just hit and record, whatnot. There was no, you know, post-production, really. There was no auto-tune and effects and stuff. It was all done in the recording process. Music has totally changed. Nowadays, you need a good engineer because, again, I'm not saying artists aren't talented today, but I'm saying the scope of music needs a talented engineer to, you know, do these effects, do these drops, do these stutters, you know, run the auto, all sorts of stuff. So
yeah, like the quality or the level of music is elevated for sure.
Exactly.
Like the polish that's behind it. And
right.
So
you don't need to be as talented behind the mic anymore. You just more so you need a talented engineer or producer to bring that song to life.
Yeah, it's a fine line, like a beautiful blend of those two things. An unbelievably talented artist beats an unbelievably talented and passionate engineer,
of course.
And they work with an unbelievably talented producer, and they do great things, right? And when one of those lacks, I think the whole product lacks,
right?
And which is what we see like so often with like SoundCloud rap is like it might be a really solid producer, a really solid artist, but it's like recorded at some crap studio, and it's like in their basement with their like Scarlett 2i2 and their SM57 or SM58. It's like, dude, your C800 is going to blow that away every time.
Exactly. But people will record with that SM57 in a horrible acoustical environment and send it to us and say, hey, I want you to mix this. And like my guest earlier, Jacob said, you know, they give us a reference of a song that was recorded on a $20,000 vocal chain.
Yeah.
And you just sent me you know, a song that was on a, you know, $250 chain. You know, it's like
literally right.
It's like we're not going to get there. You know, we can only do so much. So,
hey, one more cool question that I'm going to ask you, even though you're supposed to be asking me questions or whatever. But I know you're big into your C800. You still got the C800?
Yep.
Cool. First of all, I love like the lineage you have behind it. Like when you change out tubes and stuff. You're like always posting about it. I think that's cool that like that's your piece of like history now because they're gonna stop producing that mic, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, apparently, cool. I mean, I've heard and it's funny. Like I posted it on Reverb. Obviously, they stopped. Like once the pandemic started, they stopped producing the C800.
Mm-hmm.
Even before that, like I bought the C800 back about 5-6 years ago. Every time I've had to change the tube, like just about every 13 months on the dot.
Okay.
I used to call Sony. They'd, you know, buy a tube, whatnot. They'd send the tube. after about 3 years, so I got it maybe 2015, I want to say, 2015, 2016. So by 2018, they said, hey, we're not sending out any more tubes anymore. If you want to replace the tubes, you need to send the microphone in.
Oh, yikes.
Which they said is going to be about a 3-month turnaround. So
yeah, no way for like someone like you who's probably using it.
Which I said, well, before I would just buy a tube. In 2 weeks, I get it. I change the tube. Changing the tube is easy. So they stopped doing that. And then came COVID hit. Then all of a sudden they stopped selling the mic. And then now all of a sudden they put it back in production. And I've had people, like, as soon as they stopped selling it, like you saw people on eBay selling the Sony for 20, 25 grand, right?
That's crazy.
And they were selling religiously. I didn't want to put mine up because I honestly really don't want to sell mine. But I'm thinking, okay, I paid 10 grand for it. If I could sell it for 25 grand, that's a 15 grand come up.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. And at that time they had a clone, Golden Age was making a clone of the Sony for $4,000, $5,000.
Okay.
Which my buddy in Atlanta who had the actual Sony, he bought the clone, the Golden Age, and he shot them out side by side. You know, he ran them to distortion, whatnot. They sounded exactly alike. Exactly alike. So my idea was, okay, so he ended up selling his. He put his actual Sony for sale. He sold it for 18 grand. And he had this Golden Age clone that he paid $4 or $5 grand for. So he came up, 13 grand. So I said, okay, I can buy this clone for $4 or $5 grand and I can sell mine for around 20. I'll do that. So as soon as I decided to put mine out, which was just like probably 3-4 months ago, I look online. I got an offer for 18 grand from this guy from New York. He said, oh, I'm in a jam. I need the Sony, yada, yada. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm about to sell it. I look online for that clone. They're not making it anymore.
Oh, crazy.
And I was like, oh, shoot. Now, do I want to sell my Sony? Because there's no alternative.
Yeah. I mean, that's your workhorse, man, right?
Right.
Like, I see you posting pictures like a few times a week with that mic in a session.
Yeah, I mean, that mic is just amazing. I mean, there's no such thing as again, I'll be the first to say there's no such thing as the best mic in the world. But that mic sounds great on 80% of people.
Yeah. So, sorry, this is what I was trying to get at. I slipped my mind, and this is where we got into gear world here. And I want to get into gear world, but I want to translate it to musicians so they maybe understand. And artists is like, what? Because I think you do a CL1B as well, right? I think you do a tube tech.
Yep.
You like that? Yeah. What's the big hit behind like a C800 and a tube tech CL1B? And are you doing a 1073? Are you doing that chain?
I have 1073 or the API. Those are my two go-to preamps.
Like, super top level, just something that like musicians understand and artists understand why you're choosing those tools and why they work so well for, especially for vocal chains. Like, that's the vocal chain, right? Just super top level. Even for myself, someone in the studio who's always kind of like, I do this, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know, Joe does it and he rocks. Why? I don't know. Let's go for it. Super top level, but super quick. Like, why do you love those tools and why do they do something that you haven't found another substitute for quite as easily?
Just because the Sony, ultimately when you're looking at a microphone, you're looking at, for me, frequency response is number one, right? Letting us know what this microphone is capturing frequency wise. U87 is great. U87 is probably the most flattest out of our, high end, 3,000 and up microphones.
Yeah.
But the U87 is great, but it's not going to add a lot to it. I think at its biggest boost is probably about 8-9K, which is boosting maybe 2.5 dB, right? So it's basically what you put in the U87 is what you're getting out, right? Which again is not a bad thing because it's totally moldable. compared to the mics I have. So I have like an AKG C12. So the C12, the frequency response,
Nice.
starts boosting drastically, starting at like 3K. And it's boosting, probably 6-7 dB up until like 15K. So that is boosting a ton of presence, a ton of brightness.
Yeah.
So
and that cuts a lot then for you. Like you're just feeling like that sits in a track.
Depending on the artist, if you're working with an artist that has a very bright, present voice, that's just going to amplify it and make it harder to get rid of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Sony, it's pretty flat. I mean, it's up and down slightly, no more than 1 or 2 dB here and there, but it's got that big boost like right around 10K, right around that brightness area. Mm-hmm. So the Sony mixed with the tube, that's the magic in it is the tubes that are in it, but with that frequency response. So it's not adding a ton of presence, but it's adding that just brightness, but it does it in a way where it's not harsh. However they do it.
And I'm sure a lot of that is that tube, dude. Like
Right. And that's where it sounds so good, because it's like you don't have to do a lot, because it's like the contemporary sound today of, pop music, R&B, hip hop is bright, is bright and present. And it just sounds great on a lot of people. A lot of times if I'm using, the U87 versus Sony, when it comes to mixing, I have less to do when I use the Sony, right? Which is what it's all about. You choose the right mic, it's going to lead to less stuff you have to do in the mix, right?
Right. Like you said, fixing versus mixing, right?
Exactly.
Like,
so I'm not
you're
trying
not trying to
fix.
tailor it anymore.
Exactly.
You're trying to create a track.
Right. So that Sony, that's why it's so great, is because it makes mixing so, like, again, dealing with the tube, dealing with the circuitry, like the frequency response, everything just sounds so great coming off the Sony. It's just like it's mix ready. That's how I can pump out 30-minute mixes, because the recording quality sounds so badass. I barely have to do anything when it comes to EQing, compression, stuff like that.
Right.
I forgot what your question was. It
was just about that. Why don't you touch on, just spend like 1 or 2 minutes, just talk about the CL1B and the tube compressor, since I guess that's all we're talking about is tubes anymore. We sound like some 1970s recording engineers, but anyways, touch on that CL1B and what you love about it.
Depending on like the CL1B, I'll use a lot more for less aggressive vocals. So if I'm working, let's say, with let's say Waka Flocka type artist, right? They're going to be more aggressive, more percussive with their vocals, right? Meaning stuff like that. The Tube Tech doesn't necessarily do well with more aggressive type stuff. Neither does the 1073. So if I'm working with more artists like that, I'm going more towards the API, the 512, going through like the LA2A or Distressor or the Shadow Hills, right? Because that can handle that more aggressive type vocal. But if I'm working with a more calmer, somebody who's not as aggressive, not as percussive with their delivery, that 1073 going through the CL1B is where it's at.
Yeah.
Right. So,
dude, yeah, I just love your knowledge of this stuff. It's just like the kind of things that I think about, but I don't put it into words the way you do, and I don't enact it the same way you do. Like, as you said, it's setting you up for success when you're mixing.
Right.
And so often I feel like I'm fixing these problems when I'm actually working on the mix.
Exactly. And that's what I tell, my students, and I tell myself is, hey, if I got to, if I'm running through the 1073 and the CL1B and this person starts getting real aggressive and percussive, and I start hearing that 1073 start to distort, because it'll distort really quickly if you're very aggressive. I'll take the 2 seconds, switch it out, patch in the API, going through the LA2A or something like that, and boom, good to go. So
but those 2 minutes, those 2 minutes save you like 25 minutes later.
Exactly. With mixing, yeah, because in a mix, trying to get rid of that and whatnot, you're going to spend 30 minutes and you're not going to get it right. You're going to have to spend all this time trying to trying to get it right, trying to fix the recording versus had you just spent the not even 2 minutes, just 45 seconds repatching through a different preamp and compressor, it's
Right.
going to sound a lot better. So once I start mixing, now I don't got to fix.
Yeah, dude, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because so often it's just like, oh, we'll just clean it up when we get to mixing. Or like,
Yes.
oh,
No.
but it's never the same, dude. It's
No.
never. You can put that exact same EQ curve on, but it's just not going to be the same.
No.
Or you could just do the same exact in the box compressor after it's already been tracked, and it's not the same, dude.
No, and that's what I tell people. People say, well, why do you have all these high dollar mics and high dollar, preamps, compressors? If I can get the recording to sound badass, I know the artist is in control of how long it takes to record, right? That's not up to me. It takes me half a second to hit record.
Right.
So if it takes an artist 8 hours to record or 8 minutes, cool. But a lot of times where they're restricting me is with the mix time. If they have a budget for 2 hours, I got to get this mix done in 2 hours versus if they have a budget for 1 hour, right? So if I can get the recording as good as possible, that makes it a lot easier for me to do a 1 hour mix because it sounds great right away. So I don't have to spend 30 minutes trying to EQ and compress because I got that in the recording. Now I can spend majority of the time, I may spend 5 minutes just doing some minor EQing, maybe some subtractive EQing, a little bit of additive stuff. After 5 minutes, now I'm on to let's get creative. Let's start doing some, automating delays and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah,
so,
let's be a part of the creative process.
Exactly. So I can spend more time being creative versus had I got a crappy recording, now I got to spend more time trying to mold this. Now I don't have time. After an hour, you can run out of an hour real quick. Now, okay, I got the recording to sound good after an hour, but there's no creativity in that mix now. So
yeah.
So that's why I'm so big on, spending so much money on the front end. Let me spend, $50,000 on mics because if I get that recording badass, I can pump out 1 hour mixes as much as I don't want to. But again, it's up to the client. If they want to, if they got the budget for a 1 hour mix, I can do that because the recording sounds amazing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, dude, first of all, I appreciate what you're doing for engineers and artists and musicians. And it's cool, man. I appreciate it. And especially in Chicago where like this industry is a little bit fractured right now. And I feel like there's some inherent issues here and some inherent like old thought processes.
Yes.
What you're bringing is definitely new and modern and it's hip. So
definitely, man. I appreciate that, man. I'm just trying to mold us all together. Again, we guys like you don't get enough praise, enough attention, and enough understanding of what you do. Same with myself. People don't understand to the fullest extent. That's people say, Joe, you complain too much. I'm not complaining. I'm trying to educate people. I spend all this money. I'm not an artist. I don't record. I'm not spending this money to make my song sound better. I'm spending this money to make your song sound better.
Right.
So, and people don't understand that. So, that's what I'm trying to bring light to. And hopefully we can get Chicago into a better place where people can have the understanding, of what they need to do, or, again, not saying I know what they need to do, but having different perspectives, getting an idea of things they can do. And, just, we're a big city, man. There's no reason we shouldn't be this separated compared to cities like Atlanta or whatnot, where, everybody's in conjunction.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And I appreciate that for sure.
Definitely, man. Cool. So yeah, any parting words or advice that you have for any people?
I'll just harp back on what we said, man. Free work. It's like free or really cheap work. It's how you refine your skills. It's how you plant future seeds, man. And if you're confident in what you're doing, and you're not like unbelievably strapped for cash, it's the best way, right?
Yeah.
If you know you're going to create something of value,
Right.
there's no reason you're not doing work for really cheap or for free, unless you don't want to do work, which I can understand. Some guys are really content with their clients, so that's
Sure.
where I'm at.
No, definitely, man. I couldn't agree more. There's no such thing. Obviously, again, if you're doing free work for a guy that's never spent a dollar, then yeah, you probably want to find the next guy. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you do free work for somebody and they say, oh, okay. And now how much do you charge? Okay, you charge,
Yeah.
30, 40, 50, whatever an hour. Cool. I'll pay that. But you
Yeah.
just showed them what you can do.
Yeah,
So
and you could do it, dude. You can do this. I used to do this. I just thought of this. I used to hit up friends who would release tracks, and I'd be like, "Oh, dude, love the mix." I usually would call it like two positives and a negative. I'd be like, "I loved this. This was so cool. I loved this. This was so cool. This is something I would have done different." And then I would say like, "Hey, if you have access to the multi-track or the Pro Tool session, see if you can get that to me. I'd love to do another mix. I don't want you to release this. I don't want you to do anything with this other than just say like, here's what I bring to the table. I bet you what that engineer brought to the table was of value and quality. But if you're looking for a track that sounds like what I do, let me know. Like it might not be this track, but dude, so that's a good way to be cordial and not be a dick to other engineers, but also say like, I think I would have done it different.
Exactly. And I do that exactly to this day. Like I call it fishing. Like I'll go on Instagram. I love working with singers. So I'll go on Instagram and I'll find singers in New York, LA, wherever. And I'll do exactly that. I'll be like, hey, I really like this song. I love the opportunity to, put my spin on it, whatnot. I think what, so-and-so did was great, but if you're willing to give me a chance, let me give it a shot. If you don't like it, trash it. You still
like
got
no
what you
worries.
got. But if it works, cool. And 9 times out of 10 people tell me no. And that's one of the biggest things too, is you can't be afraid of no's.
Right.
Starting off, I was so scared of no's. Like I was that guy, when I was in high school, I was so afraid to ask girls out because I was afraid they were going to say no. I was that shy guy, that guy that was scared of no's. And I learned real quick in this business, you can't be afraid of no's. Because half the time those no's I've gotten 3 months later turn into possibilities. You never know when somebody's situation is going to change. I hit up people all the time. Hey, I'd love to do this, yada, yada. Oh, I've got somebody. I appreciate it though. Well, somebody moves, somebody's computer crashes, this, that, the other. Guess who they're hitting up? Me.
Right. Like you've got that foot in that door now,
right,
which is huge.
So yeah, I mean, it's planting those seeds, and yes, I still do it to this day. So definitely good advice.
Yeah, man. Well, dude, I appreciate it. Hey, let's jump on another time. Let's talk about the collab sessions. These projects I'm working on. I think I'd love to chat with you and maybe another musician or two about that, and just like, I think there's a lot of cool things going on with those, and I'd like to
for sure, man,
pick your brain for sure on like how I can start doing work in the hip hop world with these collab sessions, because that's just an industry I'm just not,
dude,
as talented or knowledgeable.
Man. Yeah, that's a conversation we can definitely have.
Cool, man.
All right, man. But yeah, appreciate you jumping on, man. Have a good night, and yeah, definitely let's keep in touch and let's cross that bridge.
Cool, man. All right, cheers, Joe.
All right, brother.
Thanks, bro.
Peace.
for those projects and mix a lot of that stuff. And then